Welcome to the show. This week is a little bit of a different format. It's just me in the studio, and it's super short at around about 20 minutes. I'm trialing a new format where I'm sharing lessons that I and others have learned over their entrepreneurial journey. They're timeless lessons. The idea is you can apply them at any stage of your business journey, be it pre-start or a long way into the experience. Hope you enjoy the show. If you'd like to give me some feedback, I'd really welcome that. Please head to joshcomrie.com, click on the podcast link and let me know what your thoughts are. Stick around, enjoy the show. In 2019, I was living the dream. We were just entering year 3 of our high-growth AI platform startup play called Ambit. The first 18 months were a total roller coaster. As a true startup, we were defining everything from the business, from the ground up. What the product would do now and in the future, who is our customer today, and who would they be tomorrow? How do we continue to capitalize on the opportunity, which means growth, without running out of money? As the founder, CEO, and chair, I was in the thick of literally everything. We'd raised several $1 million. We were well into 7 figures of recurring revenue, and I'd moved with my then girlfriend from my home of Auckland to Sydney to continue the stratospheric growth. Except it wasn't stratospheric any longer. We'd stalled. Badly. As the conduit between many business functions, my role was in the midst of everything. I was surrounded by sales, by customers, by partners, staff, the board, investors, and co-founders. I was squeezed, flirting with burnout, and frankly, I was miserable. On a particular Wednesday, I'd had one of those days. A please explain meeting with investors, 2 performance management conversations with key team members, a board meeting focused on finding and fixing the leaks, and a blow-up with a quite difficult co-founder. I worked from home on Wednesdays, and my girlfriend Tina walked in to see me sitting at my desk, bent over, with my forehead in my hand. Like the thinker statue, not pondering, but hurting. Now, I must go back a step here. Tina and I were around a year into our relationship at this stage. She'd been a wonderful girlfriend and is now a wonderful wife. But I kind of needed a partner. Someone who, sees you, kind of gets you, helps you see your blind spots, and keeps you focused on what's truly important. I'd asked her only that week to be more like my partner, while obviously continuing the girlfriend perks. Seeing me hurting, she simply walked up to me, put her hand on my shoulder, and asked me, "Do you need to be doing this, my love?" Now, I won't quibble with the closed nature of the question right now, as it was exactly what I needed to be hearing in that moment. In a flash, my mind went back to my personal founding principles for Ambit. I wanted a high growth and exciting business. I wanted to guide the early growth and build the business from the ground up. I also didn't want endless travel. I didn't want an internally focused role, and I didn't want to be beholden to others. And I'd told my investors that I'd be at the helm for the first 3 to 4 years. Personally, I love a start build, and I had plans to get into politics, oddly. Those plans have since been scuttled, obviously. In the background, I'd accumulated wealth from my first 2 ventures, so I wanted, not kind of needed, the money. And I'd forgotten all of those things. I got caught up in the game, I made others' priorities my own, and I'd become really, really focused on the money. That question that day from Tina led me to accelerating my succession plan for the business. Almost immediately, I reduced my hours, and that was ceasing the march towards burnout, and my life improved immeasurably. So, for you, what do you even want from this thing? Reflect deeply on this question. I started this business because. In my experience, we tend to brush off the simple questions that ask us to reflect too deeply. They're hard. They cover too many factors. And each of these factors will likely have a huge bearing on our lives. Questions like, why are we actually here? What's the meaning of life? What is the purpose of my life? Questions like, I started this business because, are sufficiently hard that many of us default to fire, aim, ready, which is not the prescribed ready, aim, fire. As my Ambit story illustrates, I still get it wrong now. Sometimes these things actually work out just fine, and that's okay. But I've encountered many, many folk who are in some version of a situation that looked a lot like mine at Ambit. Often they're at year 3, 5, 7, 9, odd numbers, oddly, of the journey. And unfortunately, they're kind of hating their business. And through literal direct causation, they're often actually hating life. Every choice has consequences. Some choices are reversible. Others define you. When I was running Ambit, millions was on the line. 35 employees were counting on me for their paychecks, dozens of customers who had bet their business plans on what we were building. And of course, the investors had hopes of a high return. The pressure, it can be immense. Either real, actual pressure, or like a great deal of A-type personality pressure, the type that's self-imposed. Of course, you've got no idea what I'm talking about, right? I call this the founder's burden. Everything flows through you. As Warren Buffett once said, reputations take a lifetime to build and moments to destroy. So for founders, our business reputation often becomes our personal legacy. Your sense of self gets wrapped up in whether this thing succeeds or whether it fails. Which is why this question matters. Why are you starting this business? Clearly, there's dozens of ways to answer that. But after working with hundreds of founders, I've found it all comes down to two critical questions. What returns are you hoping to achieve? And secondly, what are you prepared to sacrifice to achieve those returns? Everything flows from getting clear on these two things. Hey, legend. Thanks for your ears. I really appreciate you listening to the show. Everything improves through feedback. I'd be really grateful if you could head to my website, joshcomrie.com, just click on the podcast link and fill out a 2-minute survey, which will give me the insights around the things that you're enjoying about the show and where you would like us to go more into the future. It'll take less than 2 minutes. I'd be really grateful. And you'll also receive some free resources should you share your email address with us. Thanks so much and enjoy the rest of the show. Let's start with returns. I'm not going to talk to you about goal setting. Look, it's vital and it's been done to death, including by me. So many founders I meet are working towards a random goal number they've picked out of literally thin air. It's usually one of the big ones, 10 million, 50 million, 100 million, and occasionally $1 billion. Round numbers are just so easy to establish. And like round number birthdays, they seem to have some arbitrary importance attached to them. The thing is, most people, and founders are people, have actually never sat down and considered deeply how much money they really do need/want to fund their lifestyle. Personally, I advocate starting with the passive income objective, the one that's been generated from your assets, not your time. This can come in the form of rental income, dividends from companies, and maybe royalties from your IP. What I've found is that when people sit down and truly think about it, it turns out that for most of us, the actual number that you need to live a pretty great lifestyle is substantially less than the $20 million or the $100 million net worth. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not denigrating having grand objectives, because you can do really cool things, both personally and philanthropically, when you have a large pool of money available. It turns out for most people, if you've had a windfall, my recommendation normally is to eliminate personal debt, like the mortgage on the home, And if you've got things like school fees resolved, for most of us, about 15 to 20,000 per month net, as in after tax, household income creates actually a pretty great lifestyle. So if you do the maths, based on a conservative investment returns of around 10% per annum, then $3.7 million of net worth, to be clear, this does not include your personal family home, as it is not generating a return, is sufficient to create an income after tax of $20,000 per month. If you double that, say $7 million, and you took $25,000 per month after tax to run the household and your lifestyle, you'd still have over $200K annually compounding back into your capital. That means your wealth obviously keeps growing whilst you're living very comfortably. Now, these numbers I've just shared, the 3.7 or the $7 million, might sound pretty achievable, especially compared to chasing those really big, really round numbers, which is why I'm sharing them. And for many people, building towards that level of financial independence through a steady, profitable business is exactly the right path to choose. If, however, you desire the path of the true entrepreneur, which I'll describe for you later, and you manage to build a business of some real substance, you may see the opportunity for a really big exit, one that nets you, personally, 10 million, 50 million, or maybe even $100 million. And shit, that's some pretty heady and exciting stuff, right? However, the trade-offs just may not suit you. And a lifestyle operation that allows you to generate, say, a couple of $100,000 of additional income, invest wisely, and build your wealth slowly could be just the ticket. My point here is to be clear about the game you're playing and revise this every couple of years to assess its relevance and its currency in your life at that stage, and if necessary, refocus. Because here's what I see happen all the time. Founders start with one goal, then somewhere along the journey, they suddenly get seduced by bigger and more exciting targets. It's exactly like scope creep in project management. Scope creep is the situation where a project kicks off with an intended outcome. Along the way, people change their mind and want something different and more. It's as dangerous as hell in projects. Budgets blow out, stakeholder faith is destroyed, and often it burns your key resources. Unfortunately, it's incredibly common, especially in my industry, which is technology. This principle equally applies to business objectives. We frequently make the business seem more than a project for our first venture and treat it as an extension of our identity, and I'll talk more to that later on. But make no mistake, a business looks just like a project. Let me explain why. It has stakeholders, staff, customers, and shareholders. It has an intended scope and outcomes. There are resources that are required. We constantly evaluate risks and contingencies. It has, or it should have, a defined start and end point. And I could continue to go on, but I'll stop there. But I see founders get lost all the time as they let this creep soak in, changing their intention and the outcome without considering the consequences or what they set out to achieve in the first place. Let me give you a real example of this. Recently, I was working with a founder who started our conversation saying he wanted a net worth of $50 million in 10 years, growing from a current base of around about $2.5 million. It's a big jump. We're talking 20x growth. So when we dug deeper into what he actually wanted for income and for family legacy, it turns out he really needed, I get the irony of that, $20 million. As I've explained, that's sufficient to provide a great income derived from your capital. It's a far more accessible number and requires truly far less sacrifice. So how do you figure out your real number? Perhaps you could start with these 3 questions. What does your ideal month look like financially? Not just surviving, but truly thriving. What would you spend money on if you had almost complete freedom? For me, It was actually the things I loved from my childhood. I bought my first painting not long after my first paycheck from my first job when I was 12 years old. Plus, as a kid growing up, my wall was literally covered in car posters. So you can imagine subsequently what I invested my money in. Next question, how much do you need coming in monthly to live that life? Then just work backwards from there. What number of net worth generates that income? What I'm saying here is don't just pick a round number because it sounds impressive. Do the actual math on what you want your life to look like. Now, let's talk about sacrifices. What are you prepared to sacrifice to achieve your objectives? If you haven't pondered it before, success involves sacrifice. The man on top of the mountain didn't fall there. He toiled, he trained, he suffered, and he sacrificed. We tend to think the training will be faster than it is and expect the toil to be easier than it is. Rarely, however, do we consider the suffering and sacrifices we and our loved ones will need to endure. In my experience, suffering comes in the form of stress, massive workloads, cognitive strain, and the feeling of loss that comes with the sacrifice. Here's the dirty secret too many founders discover too late. The real consequences of that sacrifice. Health, and without health, there is no point in wealth. Family time, and pursuit of personal, deeply satisfying projects. That billionaire who looks so happy in the magazines and on social media, I'd encourage you to read their biography. You'll find typically multiple failed marriages, estranged relationships with kids, and often pretty awful health. 25 years ago, early in my coaching journey, I met a young IT hardware sales guy called Colin. He told me with absolute clarity that his 10-year goal was to buy a Gulfstream 5 jet. That would require around about $100 million in net worth. Planes, like boats, are as expensive as hell to run. But he had a story sorted. Early life hardship, a desire to provide for loved ones, and ultimately give back. It was a pretty strong why, and I could see sense in supporting him. Unfortunately, it all fell apart when it came to the actual hard work and sacrifice. It turns out he'd read that book called The Secret and believed it was enough just to deeply manifest his goals. It's not. Today, Colin, he's still an IT sales guy, just a bit older. Colin's story, I reckon, perfectly illustrates a principle I try to live by. Hard choices, easy life. Easy choices, hard life. Most avoid this line of thinking because it's hard and it's unfamiliar. But there's more to it. We're just not wired for long-term planning. For about 97% of our existence as a species, we've lived as hunter-gatherers, focused on immediate survival. Find food today, avoid danger today, live through today, and wake up tomorrow. The agricultural revolution, which kicked off long-term planning and delayed gratification, only happened around 10,000 years ago. That's about 3% of our time as modern humans. Our brains are still wired for immediate risk and reward, not 10-year business plans. There are too many variables, uncertainties, and, well, just things to consider. So we avoid it or we undercook it. Bill Gates said that we tend to overestimate what we can achieve in a year and underestimate what is possible in 10 years. If you reflect with that time frame in mind, it really gives us incredible latitude for achievement. It really is astounding what can be done over 10 years. A modest business turning over, say, $250,000 per annum with a consistent 25% annual growth rate, which again is relatively modest when you're of that scale, will reach $2 million in 10 years. But none of this happens by accident. It happens because someone sat down, fought against 300,000 years of evolutionary wiring, and made the hard decisions about what they actually wanted and what they were willing to sacrifice to get it. Your future self is going to thank you for you doing this work now, or they're going to resent you for avoiding it. So please start thinking now about what you actually want and what you're prepared to sacrifice to get it. Because in 10 years, you're going to be somewhere. The only real question is whether you chose that destination or whether it chose you. This is part one of a two-part episode. Next week, I'm going to share the model that I've created that will help you figure out exactly what type of founder you're meant to be, whether you're a lifestyler, solopreneur, operator, owner, or entrepreneur. Once you know what you want and you're willing to sacrifice, you need to know which path will actually get you there. I hope to see you next week. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Your ears are really important to me. If you haven't already, why not check out joshcomrie.com. There's a bunch of free resources on there, a downloadable chapter of my upcoming book, 2 commas, a diagnostic to help you understand where your business may be at in relation to your exit journey. And why not feel free to drop me an email with any feedback that you could have. Any way I and any of us can improve is through feedback. Thanks again for listening.